Myself, Chandresh Singh. I've been working with a PhD for around 8+ years in information security, and I basically maintain the endpoint security portfolio of the bank. So, and I'm ISO 22301 certified lead auditor, 31,000 risk management lead implementer, and CISSP certified professional. Coming to InfosecTrain. InfosecTrain is a very reputed organization in this field, and we have a very wide range of professionals which are there and which are very keen on training other people to improve the overall workforce skill set in the InfoSec domain. And we are having very high quality technical services and certifications, and have over 15 years of combined experience in this training domain. We offer 150 plus training courses. We have trained more than 15,000 professionals in InfoSec domain, and we have many corporate clients also, which leverage our proficiency. Here's a list of few corporate partners who have put their trust on InfoSecTrain to upskill their staff. Mainly Microsoft, Deloitte, all the big names are there. Capgemini, Infosys, Samsung, etc. Going forward, why you should choose InfoSec? We have a long list of subject matter experts which come with vast hands-on industry experience, and we have global partnerships with industry leaders such as Microsoft, ISACA, EC Council, etc. So that is why you should choose InfoSecTrain. Coming to CISSP. So, and here is a little distribution, domain-wise distribution given. So as you can see that the first domain is the most scoring and is the bedrock of the entire CISSP certificate examination and all the concepts which are discussed in the CISSP. It sets the objective of the entire InfoSec mindset or operations or efforts of an organization. So we'll proceed with the domain one. And in order to discuss domain one properly, I have broken it down to some 3 or 4 objectives, which we shall focus on whilst preparing for the domain one. And the first of such objectives is security and risk management. So the security and risk management, it starts with governance. It starts with governance, and what governance basically is, the top management, they speak a different language because those are different. Those are business people, and business people have their own set of vocabulary. And similarly, different stakeholders, for example, HR, you have finance, you have marketing. So each set of people have their own vocabulary, and IT have their own vocabulary. So each group of individual which run the show in an organization have their own set of vocabulary that they use in their day-to-day work. And that is where governance comes into picture. Governance is the tool to enable the top management to understand your IT efforts. So it includes all the managerial metrics or the kind of documentation that you prepare. Say you have put access control. Now, how will top management understand what access control means and how to measure the effectiveness of the access control? So these kind of nitty-gritties comes into governance. Governance basically is a means to make the top management understand your efforts in information security. Then we come to CIA triad. CIA triad basically means confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And this is the foundation of all the information security efforts that we put in to secure. We basically, in information security, we basically ensure that CIA for an information asset of the organization is ensured. What CIS means is, I've already told you that it means confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And in context of what? In context of information asset of the organization. What information asset means? Information asset can be anything. It can be people, process, or technology that the organization may have. So any people who are involved in its operations are asset. Any kind of process that So yeah, we were talking about CIA in terms of people, process, and technology of an organization, which forms the asset. People, process, and technology forms the asset of the organization, and we in information security ensure CIA of the information asset or the assets of the organization. By CIA, we mean confidentiality, integrity, and availability. What confidentiality means is to ensure that whoever is authorized to have access to the information asset or the asset of the organization is only allowed to access the information, to have access to the information. Say, for example, the way you protect your any online accounts using password and user ID, that is where you ensure the confidentiality of your account information, which is behind the password and behind your user credentials. For example, you have a Gmail account in which your asset is information is stored. Information in this case, asset is your email. Whatever emails that you may be having is within your Gmail account, and that Gmail account is protected by a user ID and password, and that is known to just you. That is where confidentiality comes into play. Anybody who knows the credentials will be authorized to access your Gmail account and hence have access to your information asset. So that is the concept of confidentiality, that only the people who are authorized to have access to the information be allowed to have access to it. Then comes integrity. Integrity means that only the people who are allowed to change or interact or modulate the information asset or change any values pertaining in the information asset shall be allowed to do it. So for example, if you're trying to send somebody an email, and instead of whatever you have written, there is a man in the middle attack happening in case of your email ID, and somebody changes the subject or the matter which is written in the body of the email, and hence the recipient receives something else. You were trying to send something and the recipient receives something else. That is your integrity. That is where the integrity of that email is violated. You were trying to send something, say a hello message, instead of they receive the bye message, and that is what you never intended to send them. So integrity is to ensure that whatever information is there shall remain to be the same always and every time, and every time it is accessed, it shall be the same. So every time you are trying to send somebody a hello message and they receive the message, it shall remain a hello message. It shall not be that the next day they open the same message and they are getting a bye message, or say they are getting a hello world or something else. So the value of that message must be preserved, and that is integrity of the information. In whatever form the information is stored and whatever information is stored must be preserved. That is integrity. Third is availability. Availability basically means that whatever the users are which are accessing your information assets must be made available. The information asset must be made available to the end user or the users whoever are going to interact are the users of the information or the asset shall have access to the information asset. For example, if you say we were talking about the Gmail account. So one day you're trying to access Gmail and Gmail is not opening just because the mail server is down or the Google server is down. That is that is where the availability of your Gmail instance has gone down. And when you're trying to access your mailbox, you won't be able to access it. And that is where you lose the availability. So this is what we try and achieve a balance of. We always try and achieve a balance of CIA in all of our information security efforts. Integrity always takes the forefront of it, but we always try and achieve a balance of CIA. Now, what we are protecting mostly is data, and it can include infrastructure, it can include data, it can include, just as I've told you before, that it can include people, process, and technology. And what is the most important thing as of now is data. Data is the next goal, as they say it. So data requires the most efforts in it, and data can be present in your environment in three forms. First is data in rest, second is in use, and third is in motion. So what is data at rest? Data at rest is basically any data which is stored in your assets or in your, say, your server, your laptop, wherever. You're watching this live stream right now, and the Zoom application is installed on your machine. So that is where the data is stored. Unless you start the Zoom application, it will remain to be in your hard disk. But as soon as you start the Zoom application to join this meeting, you have loaded it on your system RAM. So that is where it comes in data, comes to data in use. So Zoom application, when it was not running, it was stored in your hard disk, and hence it was data in rest. But as soon as you join this meeting, the Zoom application has launched and hence loaded on the memory, on the RAM of the machine, and hence it is in use. What is in motion? So this data stream, whatever presentation that I'm presenting to you, is coming to you over network. So when the presentation is getting transported from my machine to your screen, it is going through a network, and that is where the data is in motion. So that is data in rest, use, and motion. Whatever data is stored on your secondary storage or permanent storage is data in rest. Whatever data is loaded on your working memory or RAM is your data in use. And whatever data you're transacting over the network is your data in motion. Now there are some key terms that you must be familiar with in order to formulate the concepts or make the dots connect. When it comes to the examination, you'll be faced with a lot of questions where these fundamental words, some key words will be discussed, and you have to have the right understanding of those words, because oftentimes what we do is we use these words interchangeably. For example, risk and threat and vulnerability. We use these words interchangeably. I used to use it interchangeably because before I had gotten serious about the CISSP thing. So what is the relationship between a threat agent, threat, vulnerability, risk, asset, exposure, and safeguard? So here's a small graphic which explains this entire working relationship very well. So I'll start with the vulnerability. Any system that you must be having is not 100% secure. Every system that is operating or is in operation, any people process technology which we are using, have some inherent vulnerabilities or flaws in it. Vulnerabilities are basically flaws which are inherent in our people processor technology. Just remember that whenever we are dealing with any kind of asset, whenever we talk about assets, it is generally talking about people, process, and technology. So vulnerability is basically some sort of a lack in a system, a flaw in the people, processor technology. A threat exploits a vulnerability somehow, and that leads to the risk. That leads to the risk, and risk damages your asset. So the risk has the potential to damage your asset, and the extent of damage is exposure. In order to limit our exposure to the risk appetite of the organization, we put safeguards or controls. We limit the exposure within the risk appetite of the organization. So everybody has their everybody is everybody has certain risk appetites. When we were young, we perhaps some of you might have enjoyed jumping into a pool. Maybe at an older age, you are afraid of slipping on wet surface. So maybe you stay away from pools and all. So that is our risk appetite. Over time, the risk appetite has changed. Initially, you were enjoying jumping into the pool. Now you're afraid that if you go on a wet surface, you may slip and break a bone or two. So now your risk appetite has changed. So whatever exposure that is there caused by the risk to our assets, we try to limit it by putting controls we try to limit the exposure within the risk appetite of the organization. And who exploits the vulnerability? It is the threat agent. And threat is what an exploit is to the vulnerability. So that is a working relationship. A vulnerability is a flaw in the system. Any threat actor is looking for a vulnerability in your system, in the people, process, or technology. And that is a threat. The vulnerability leads to risk, and risk damages your assets, and assets uh, this damage causes the exposure, and you, in order to limit the exposure within your risk appetite, put controls or safeguards. That is how it how is the working relationship is. Now comes the information security management system, organizational security frameworks, and organizational structures. So why do we need a framework? We need a framework in order to, so an organization may have multitude of moving parts, multitude of line of businesses. You have multiple departments, HR, IT, marketing, stuff like that. They are operating at different aims and objectives. But there must be a common platform through which everybody can communicate, through which everybody can relate or map their aims and objectives. So that is what a framework provides you. Framework provides you a basic structure to whatever you're performing. And that is why we use organization security framework in order to establish a basic understanding or standardize a basic understanding of security throughout the multiple line of businesses that we are having in the organization. When it comes to information security management system basically gives you a scoping mechanism. Say there are multiple standards available out there. ISO 27001, for example, for ISMS. Then you have NIST, and multitude of standards that you can implement in your organization. But you need to scope it out. For example, ISO 27001 includes 114 types of controls, 114 types of control. But not every organization needs to implement all of these 114 controls, and hence we limit the number of controls that we are going to implement in per case basis. And that is called scoping. So a management system basically gives you the scoping capabilities. It gives you the metric to measure your controls or efforts against. For example, I say that all endpoints must be having antivirus installed, and all the antivirus which is installed in the endpoints must be having the definition level of at least n-2, that is 2 days before today. So that is my metric. That is how I measure my compliance. So management system basically gives you a scoping tool to scope what kind of controls to implement in the environment, and then gives you a metric to measure the efficacy of the controls that you have put, so that you can improve the posture of the organization eventually, or improve the compliance of the organization eventually. Then coming to organization structure, you must have a hierarchy in place in any organization. And similarly, in case of how we correlate it with security operations, we have data owners, data custodians, and system owners. So basically, your system owners come to the lowest layer of hierarchy, and your data owners come to the topmost layer of the hierarchy. So your management may be your data owner. Data custodian can be having multiple controls or multiple verticals that he is taking care of. And a system owner generally directly deals with the tools or controls or countermeasures that we have put. Now coming to policy standards, procedures, and guidelines. So what is a policy? Policy document basically gives us a bird's eye view of what to do and why to do. Standards give us a measurable guideline and the things one organization shall do in order to be compliant to the standard or the regulation and whatnot. Procedures tell us the specifics that shall be performed in order to comply with the statements mentioned in standards and policies. So the procedure is the lowest level of document. Procedure allows you to say, my policy says that, my information security policy says that all the endpoints that are there connected in the environment shall have patches installed and up to date always and all the time. Your standard must be telling that patch management is a control that you shall implement in your organization. What procedure will tell you is, procedure will tell you that, okay, the organization is using MECM, Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager, to deploy patches on all the endpoints. And in order to push patches in all the endpoints, you have to provision it using this method. And in order to push patches on all the desktops or endpoints, you have to do this. There'll be a flowchart or algorithmic steps mentioned in the procedure. So procedure comes to the lowest tier of the documentation, and policy comes to the highest tier of the documentation. In procedure, you'll get the specifics to deal with the tools that are there in the environment in order to comply with the standards and policies, statements made in standards and policies. And then comes guidelines. Guidelines are basically good to have things which are not mandatory to enforce, but with industry experience in the past, referring to the history of whatever incidences industry may have seen, they come up with some good to have things that you shall enforce in your environment. And that is basically guidelines, what guidelines are. Coming to people part of it, since people are the biggest vulnerability in the environment, because if we have not automated most of things, then the people become the biggest vulnerability in the environment. And also saving the lives of people, saving the people itself is the biggest responsibility of an organization. So just remember one thing for the examination: whenever there is a question of saving lives, it becomes front and center of your efforts. People's lives always matter, and saving their lives is always a priority. Now, when it comes to people, there are some good to have things. That is personal security, separation of duties, split knowledge, collusion, quorum authentication, dual control, job rotation, mandatory vacation, and guard leave, etc. These are the kind of vocabulary. When you read the CBK, common body of knowledge, you'll get these vocabulary very easily. So separation of duty is when you say you have a maker checker concept. There is say you're somebody who is provisioning users on Active Directory, or say you're somebody who is opening an account in the system. And how it is defined is one person fills in the entire form and the other person approves it. So that is separation of duty. Split knowledge is you know half of the thing and the other person knows half of the thing. It is only when both of you are in that you can perform a job. So that is split knowledge. Collusion is when two or more people come together to do something malicious. That is collusion. Quorum authentication is again just like split knowledge. You have in split knowledge you have two. In quorum you have more than two. So you have n people, and within which you say n-3, n-4 people must be there in order to approve or authenticate something. Then job rotation is basically if somebody is in a particular job role for too long, he may be breaching processes, and hence may increase your vulnerability or make your system may introduce vulnerabilities which are not accounted for. Hence, job rotation says that you shall keep on moving people from their job roles. Do not let one person hold a position for too long. Then mandatory vacations are like when you ask somebody to leave for get a leave for 7, 15, 20 days, so that you can check what operations they have performed in past and just review and reconcile it if it is in line with your policies and processes and whatnot. Then it comes to onboarding and hiring the people, candidate screening, hiring, employment agreement policies, onboarding, transfer, terminations, and NDAs. NDAs are most important. NDAs are non-disclosure agreements. It shall be signed when you're onboarding somebody, when you're hiring somebody, their background must be verified. Two most important things is their background must be verified. And second, they must be shown a acceptable users policy, and an NDA must be signed between the organization and the party which is joining, so that they do not disclose any information which is sensitive or confidential. Then we come to vendors, consultant, contractors, and downstream liabilities. Downstream liabilities basically Upstream is when somebody is providing you some service, and downstream is when you are providing somebody some service. So consider your organization is floating in the air. Whatever is above it is upstream. Whatever is below it, it is downstream. So downstream liabilities basically is uh, if somebody who uses your information to process something else, for example, channel partners who take your CBS or who take access to your application in order to help you with your business. Background verification of those people also becomes your liability then. Then compliances of policies, PCI DSS, GDPR, and privacy policies, etc. You must be aware of PCI DSS. It is Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. So these are kind of the regulatory guidelines which shall be followed. Then one of the key important thing is security awareness training, review and update of material and evaluation metrics. So security awareness, why it is important. You guys must be working in technology only, working in IT only, and you must be aware that how rapidly the entire landscape shifts when it comes to IT. So that is why your people who you have hired must be upskilled in order to sustain your objectives, business objectives. So when it comes to people, when it comes to sustaining or obtaining your business objectives, people and processes are the most important things that we shall focus on. And that is why security awareness and training is very important, because people must be made aware of the processes, change in processes, and must be upskilled in order to keep up with the new tools which are there, which are out there in the environment, and to make the right decision based on the tools which are available in the environment for the organization's stated business objectives. Then your material must be reviewed and updated. It is not that your material is 10 years old and you're still using the same material for training the people, because technology has already shifted, and hence even if you're training people with the old material, they'll still getting the old information and not the new environment which has changed. Then you must have evaluation metrics. So whenever you're training somebody, you have to have some sort of a metric to understand how effective your program is in order to improve it going forward. Now coming to professional ethics, there are multiple code of ethics, but what is important for us to understand is, and what is important with the exams perspective, and you're going to get a few questions from this, is professional ethics and ISA Square's canons of ethics. So ISA Square's code of ethics, and there are 4 canons that they have stated. And in this graphic, I have captured the 4 canons. That is, first is protect society, the common good, necessary public trust and confidence, and the infrastructure. Second is act honorably, honestly, justly, responsibly, and legally. You don't need to remember all these words. Third is provide diligent and competent service to the principals. And fourth is advance and protect the profession. Now, what you need to understand from here, now what you need to remember for the exam here is, who can raise a complaint against you as a security professional breaching any of these 4 canons. Any member of general public can raise a complaint against breach of canon 1 and 2. Principals, meaning whoever you have a client and you have a relationship, you have a official relationship or working relationship with, can raise a complaint against breach of 2 ISA square for the breach against canon 3. And any of your peer security professionals can raise a complaint against you for the breach of canon 4. So that is what you need to remember when it comes to the exam. There are 4 canons. Any member of general public can raise a complaint against you to ISA square in case of breach of canon 1 and 2. Any principals can raise a complaint against you to ISA square when it comes to breach of canon 3. And similarly, for any professional, any working professional can raise a complaint against you to ISA square for the breach of canon 4. This is important for exam. Now coming to risk management. Risk management is a very important topic, and risk management shall be an integral part of your entire organization process, and whatever decision-making process that you're following, it shall be an integral part of that. So there are again many frameworks out there, ISO 31000, NIST 839, etc. You can use any frameworks, and as I've told you, the frameworks are used to in order to standardize the language of standardize and ease the communication between multiple line of business in the business. Again, I've told you threats and vulnerabilities shall be accounted against people, process, and technology, which are there in the organization. Now, coming to risk assessment, there is a broader term which is risk assessment, and then there is a term within it which is risk analysis. So in case of risk assessment, we do assessment of an entire business activity that an organization is performing. In case of risk analysis, we take a single threat and we analyze what are the possibilities of it getting it leading to exposure. So risk analysis is a activity which comes within the risk assessment, within the entire risk assessment process of the organization. Now coming to risk assessment particularly, we can perform risk analysis in a quantitative or qualitative method. What qualitative method is? Qualitative method of risk assessment generally deals with assigning a dollar value to whatever risk that a threat poses to the organization. And in case of qualitative risk assessment, we do give a severity rating. Okay, this is a low risk or a medium risk or a high risk or a catastrophic risk. So that is what it is. That is what is enumerated in this 3x3 grid. Green is low, yellow is medium, and red is high. So that is your qualitative risk analysis. In case of quantitative risk analysis, what we do is there are a few terms which you shall keep in mind. That is single loss expectancy, analyzed loss expectancy, and analyzed rate of occurrence. What is single loss expectancy? Single loss expectancy is your asset value. Say you have a data center which is having asset value of 10 million. And when calculating asset value, we shall not just focus on the hardware which is there in the data center. You shall focus on the hardware, the software that it is running, the data that it is running. And when you lose all of the infrastructure, all of the data center building, the store, the servers which are there, the OS and data which it is running, the reputational and regulatory losses that you may or the organization may incur because of that outage shall also be accounted for when you're considering the asset value. So that is your asset value. Asset value is not just your hardware, but an overall valuation in terms of assigning a dollar value to the overall loss that you anticipate in case of a failure of the asset. In case of our example, it is data center. So in case of failure of a data center, what kind of loss in terms of dollars are you expecting? Then comes your exposure factor. So say I'm doing a threat analysis, or say I'm doing a risk analysis of an earthquake affecting my data center operations. So here the asset value is 10 million. And if a earthquake hits my data center, it will, I know that I'll lose 50% of my operations, or yeah, say 50% of my operations or 60% of my operations. For this example, let's take 50%. So the single loss expectancy basically states that what amount in dollar value are you going to incur if you are hit by the risk factor that you're considering, in this case, the earthquake. So if my data center is hit by an earthquake, which is going to affect 50% of my operations, which is going to affect 50% of it, then what is the loss expectancy? Single loss expectancy is basically the product of asset value and the exposure factor. Exposure factor here is 50%, that means 0.5, and asset value is 10 million. That brings it to Yeah. So if say my data center, my total asset value is 10 lakhs and my exposure factor is 50%, then I'll incur 5 lakhs of, then my single loss expectancy becomes 5 lakhs. And then we come to annualized loss expectancy, which is basically a product of single loss expectancy multiplied with the annualized rate of occurrence. So say I'm in my data center is located in an earthquake zone where there is a possibility of getting an earthquake every 100 years. So this factor becomes 0.01. And when I multiply, when I wish to arrive at the annualized loss expectancy, I can simply multiply the 5 lakhs value that I've arrived at in single loss expectancy with the annualized rate of occurrence, which is 1 by 100. So 0.01, which gives me 5 lakh 0.01, 50,000, 5,000. So my annualized loss expectancy becomes 5,000 rupees. So whenever I'm making a control decision, whenever I'm trying to put a control to mitigate for earthquake risk for my data center, I will not try to go beyond that dollar value. That is where the risk analysis, the whole process of risk analysis, uh, assists me. Risk analysis is basically done in order to prioritize the type of risk or the risks that you wish to mitigate for. So in case of this example, if I wish to mitigate for an earthquake risk for my data center, I'll try not to put more than 5,000 a year to mitigate for that risk. So that is the reason why we do the whole risk analysis and risk assessment process to arrive at the risks that we wish to mitigate for and the quantum of money that we can put to mitigate for that risk. That is your risk treatment, cost control, and residual risk. So basically, risk treatment plan gives you the list of risks and your analysis on that. Then you prioritize what kind of risk you need to mitigate for and how much you can put on the control. That is your cost of control. And the residual risk is you cannot mitigate 100% of it. Say you have mitigated for earthquake, you have chosen the right kind of design, the right kind of material to prevent an earthquake introducing massive damage to your data center, but you still cannot eliminate the possibility of an earthquake damaging your data center. So there will be some risk which is still there after your whole risk mitigation process, and that is called your residual risk. So whatever risk which is there after you have put the controls is becomes your residual risk. So residual risk is basically your risk value minus your control that you've put. Now, risk treatment can involve what kind of controls that we put in order to treat a risk. So, and also, yeah, while treating the risk, we can choose either to accept the risk. That means that we are okay with whatever risk that is there, and we continue doing the same thing in a similar fashion. We do not put any controls. B, we can mitigate the risk. We can put controls and reduce the exposure, reduce the risk. 3, we can avoid the risk. We can stop doing the thing that is causing the risk and hence eliminate the possibility of a risk. And 4th is that we share the risk with somebody. So that is where your cyber insurance, etc., comes into play. So these are the 4 possible choices for treating a risk, which shall be considered while during the risk treatment. Now, what kind of controls that can we put in the environment? That is preventive, detective, corrective, deterrent, recovery, compensating. And these can be put in 3 contexts, that is physical, technical, and administrative. So what is a preventive control? Anything which prevents something from occurring. So say when it comes to your physical control, it can be a fence. It prevents a theft from occurring, or it gives a right signal that nobody shall, it's a private property, and the signboards like it's a private property and do not breach will be a punishable offense and kind of stuff like that. That is your preventive measure. Then detective measure is detecting when a breach is occurring. So if you have put security guards, that becomes your detective measure. Then you have corrective measures. If something has happened, how do you fix it? Those controls come under corrective controls. And then you have deterrents. So deterrents are basically there to uh, demotivate someone uh, from conducting any crime or something. So deterrent, basically your CCTV cameras or any warning banners that are put are deterrent controls, which deter somebody from committing something malicious. Then recovery is basically when a disaster occurs, how do you return to normal operations? Those kind of controls are recovery controls. Your backup site, your DR site is recovery controls. Compensating controls is when you put something which improves your resilience. That is your compensating controls. And all these controls can be put in three contexts, which is physical, technical, and administrative. Physical is like putting fences. Technical is putting multi-factor authentication, using stronger AAA. Administrative control is having a process in place which requires proper user onboarding, a method to user onboarding, having people know what is the acceptable use of the assets that they're interacting with. Then, as I've told you, there can be since you're in a business, there is a whole supply chain of things you're getting for your business to run your business, and then delivering your product or services to the customer. So that involves supply chain, and there that also involves risk. For example, if you're remember the whole Stuxnet problem in one of the in case of Stuxnet, what was happened is one of the suppliers bugged the servers which were provided to the organization, and hence it led to a operational downtime. So that kind of risks are involved in supply chain, and supply chains do introduce a lot of risk. You must be remembering this whole the year started with this. Oh, I'm unable to recall. Okay, leave it. So yeah, supply chain risk management must be carried out. And then upstream, downstream, I've already told you, imagine your organization floating in the middle, and then anything which is any organization on which you depend is upstream, and any organization which depends on your services or product is downstream. Then escrows are basically, say you have obtained a software code from somebody, a software from somebody, and you have a 5-year contract with them, and you're expecting a continuous support for 5 years. But say after 2 or 3 years, the organization goes bankrupt from where you have obtained the software. That is where escrows come in place. These are third parties which guarantee that even if the provider which has gone bankrupt or which is not providing the managing the services, the escrow third party takes the responsibility of continuing the support or whatever is expected. Then you should have disaster recovery and business continuity. Disaster recovery is business continuity is a subset of disaster recovery. So any event which hinders with your operations, which disrupts your operation, can be considered disaster. And recovering from disaster is basically disaster recovery. That is where your backup, your DR sites come into picture. You can have hot, cold sites or warm sites. You can have multiple types of backups. And what business continuity means is whatever your business function is. For example, your people must get salaries on time. So that is one of the business functions. In case your online systems are down, you can resort to a secondary kind of offline system to give them the salaries and continue running your operations. So business continuity kind of deals with the continuity of operations, and disaster recovery deals with reinstating the situation as before. So whenever a disaster hit, you go back to the point when the disaster hit, and basically reconstruct everything as before. That is disaster recovery. And business continuity is you continue your operations without hindering the end user. That is your business continuity. Then we come to RTO, RPO. RTO is basically a recovery time objective. RPO is recovery point objective. So anytime the disaster hits, from there the clock starts ticking, and when you recovered it to the previous state, that is your RTO, that is your recovery time objective. So say you have a critical operations, for example, in case of a bank, you have the core banking solution on which every branch is functioning and every ATM, etc., is functioning, or all channels are functioning on that. So it becomes a critical activity. You cannot afford to keep it down for too long. So RTO maybe for that activity is 4 hours. So anytime the CBS goes down, I'll have to recover it within 4 hours. What RPO is, it's recovery point objective. So whenever the disaster hits, how much amount of data in terms of time can you lose, can you afford to lose, is your recovery point objective. For example, you have a DCDR sync, DCDR sync, which is backing up data every 2 minutes, every 3 minutes, or say every 15 minutes. So whenever disaster hits, there is a chance that the last backup had run 5 minutes back, and hence, as soon as the disaster hits, you lose the data of that 5 minutes, because you have set the log shipping, or you have set the synchronization to happen every 15 minutes, and the disaster has hit after 5 minutes of last scheduled run. So there is a gap of 5 minutes when there was no backup. So you lose those 5 minutes of worth of data. And why cannot you lose the data after that disaster hitting? Because your operations has already gone down. So you cannot lose data any further. So the RPO becomes now here is 5 minutes. So RPO is the amount of data that you can afford to lose in case of a disaster hits. And RTO is your recovery time objective, how much time you take in order to recover back to the original state. Now coming to compliance. Compliance can be to a lot many things. Basically, we can categorize it under laws, regulations, and jurisdictions. Regulations basically can be coming from regulatory authority. Laws can be coming from legal bodies, and jurisdiction is laws of land. There can be civil and criminal laws, and there'll be repercussions in breaching those. And yeah, so yeah, in case of so the thing to remember for exam is the difference between civil and criminal laws. In case of criminal laws, you are either guilty or not guilty, and your freedom can be restricted. There can be a jail term involved in case of breaching criminal laws. In case of breaching civil laws, there can be penalty, but your freedom won't be curtailed. And defendants are either liable or not liable for the damages done to the other party. Now, computer crimes can be of three types: computer assisted, targeted, or computer reverse incidental. For example, computer assisted. In case of computer assisted, you use the computer as the primary tool of the crime. Computer targeted, your crime was targeting a specific computer system or network. And computer is incidental is that crime could have happened with or without computer. The computer or network or IT infra was just a part of it by chance. So it is not mandatory to use the computers for such kind of criminal activities, but it was just happened to be a part of it. Okay, now a typical attack or breach can be correlated on with a cyber kill chain or TTP. So TTP is your tool, technique, and procedure. That is how MITRE defines to how these are basically frameworks. So cybersecurity kill chain is developed by Lockheed Martin. You can go to their website and check it out. It is a very well-defined framework of they basically define how a vulnerability can be exploited and how then persistence can be achieved, and then backdoors and C2 communication, command and control center communication can be established from the victim's computer. Similarly, and then there is MITRE's framework of TTP, MITRE attack framework. in which they specify the tools, techniques, and procedures used by specific APTs, advanced persistent threats, which are nation state uh, entities, which are trying to say you have Russian hackers, you have Chinese hackers, and stuff like that. So these are APTs, advanced persistent threat, which have too much time and money and resources behind them to keep on working for long and long times to exploit a vulnerability in a system. Then your company asset, then your information asset can be a trade secret, copyright, or trademark, or patent and licenses. What is the difference between these three? uh, a trade secret is any formula, or say Coke has a formula which is their trade secret, which if exposed can negatively impact their market leadership or market position. A copyright is basically reproducing the same material is restricted, and the material can be reproduced only after the written consent, or under certain consent of the original owner of the material. So softwares are generally, a piece of code can be copyrighted, media, videos, audios can be copyrighted. Then coming to trademarks are generally certain images or logos or taglines which define or resemble a company. For example, we have infosec train car logo over here, that can be a trademark. Then patents are any thing which is novel, or any novel approach toward doing something, which is registered under US patent office, and hence the users is restricted to that particular entity who holds the patent to that particular method or process. Then licenses, it generally deals with the software industry. It generally is in context with software industry. So whenever you use a software or any application, you are presented with the end user license agreement, which is EULA. That is your license. All of you, I hope that all of you must have encountered EULA at least once in your life. That is end user license agreement for using the software responsibly. Then coming to due care and due diligence, and again downstream liability we have already discussed. So due care and due diligence is when there is a certain expectation which is uh, there with every practitioner of cybersecurity, that you follow certain guidelines or certain best practices, and that forms your due diligence. For example, as we know that your credentials must be, the quality of password must be good, it must be strong. So whenever writing a policy, or whenever uh, defining a control, you shall always use good quality password. You must have encountered it in your real life also, that many of the websites, when you're registering or creating a new password, they tell you that your password strength is weak, less than 8 characters, you should have more complexity and whatnot. So that kind of thing comes under due diligence, and due care is exercising that due diligence. So due diligence expect you to do something, and when you actually exercise those, you are putting it into work, putting it into efforts. That is your due care. You're taking due care. Then we come to responsibility and accountability. Accountability is what responsibility is. Somebody is um, answerable for some task or some role or responsibility, and accountability is basically measurable. So that role responsibility, that must be associated with a metric, and that measurability introduces the accountability for that role or responsibility. Then coming to frameworks, we have, as I've told you before, that frameworks provide structures to our effort. It basically allows interoperability of all the line of businesses that are there in an organization. And since all the people may have different terminologies, different vocabulary that they use, just like I've told you in the beginning, that CBK gives you a vocabulary for dealing with infosec, dealing with whole CISSP material, and gives you the right context, set of frame of mind to think properly in terms of cybersecurity or information security, information system security. Frameworks provides similarly a structure to the whole efforts that we are going to put. It tries to standardize the entire stack of lines of businesses, different lines of businesses which interact with each other in day-to-day operations. We have many frameworks. For example, RMF, we have risk management frameworks. We have when it comes to risk management framework, we have just like we have discussed about risk management, ISO 31000 is there. For risk management framework, we have NIST, RMF, we have ISO 27005. ISO, basically, the basic difference between NIST and ISO is NIST is applicable generally to USA, and ISO is generally applicable to any country or any organization which operates internationally, which operates across continents or across geographies. So any organization which is having international aspirations shall focus on adopting frameworks which are from ISO or any international organization. Now we have information security frameworks, which can be security program framework or security control framework. So in program frameworks, we define control procedures, business processes, and people, which is covered in ISO 27000. As I've told you, ISO 27001 is ISMS, Information Security Management System, which defines certain controls. Similarly, ISO security program frameworks do just that for us. They define controls, as we have already discussed in the beginning of this material, that controls are there to reduce your exposure to the risk appetite of the organization. Procedures are your, just like we have discussed in policy, policy regulation, policy standards and procedures. That is your procedure. Procedure is the lowest level of documentation, which gives you a step-by-step approach to managing a solution or tool. Then your business processes and people, we have discussed about all of these. Then coming to control framework, again, purpose of controls and selection based on security categories of asset. So how do we define security category? We define security category based on the risk analysis that we have performed, and then we do the risk treatment. For risk treatment, as I've told you, there can be four possibilities. Either we accept the risk, we avoid the risk, we mitigate it, or we transfer the risk. So that is how we do the control selection based on the risk treatment plan that we have arrived at. After the risk assessment or risk analysis and assessment, we arrive at risk treatment plan, and based on the risk treatment plan, we select the right controls based on the treatment plan that we have assigned to a particular risk factor. Then you have enterprise architecture framework. As I've told you, framework gives a structure to the entire chaos, and there can be different frameworks to translate the entire efforts, or translate the entire efforts in the views with which a stakeholder can relate. So HR uses different terminology. HR follows a different workflow. Marketing follows a different workflow, and how to make both of the teams understand what you wish to achieve is what frameworks enable you to do it. Then you have ITIL, Information Technology Infrastructure Library, which is a service management tool. Then you have Six Sigma, which is a process improvement tool. If you implement Six Sigma, it enables you to improve your process gradually. There is one important thing for exam, that is CM, that is capability maturity model, which was developed by this Carnegie Mellon University SAI, Software Engineering Institute. It defines 5 levels, and this graphic, this graphic covers this very neatly. So whenever an organization starts something, the capability of that organization to enforce that something that it envisions can be incomplete. And then from there, it starts to perform. So capability is assessed only till the level 4. And your maturity starts from the very first day you start performing the action or the operations that you have decided to perform. And that is from where we start assessing the maturity. So it basically tells you that you decided to do something. Say you decided to implement uh, one of the, say you decided to implement ISMS, that is ISO 27001 framework, in your entire organization. And you set the context as, say, you have chosen one control from that ISO framework, that antivirus must be installed in all the machines. Now you do not have any antivirus installed in any of your workstations, and that is when your capability level is incomplete. Then you start setting up a process that every time a asset is introduced in the environment, it has to has the antivirus in it, and you capture that in a procedure. You introduce that in a policy, that all the workstations which are going to be commissioned or onboarded in the environment shall have antivirus installed in it. You have a say private cloud setup, or you have a asset management tool that you're using. There you define a template which is having a antivirus provisioned in it, installed in it. So that is how you start. Then we come to managed state, where you have the right metric to measure. Say you have the asset inventory of the organization, and against which you know on what machines your antivirus is installed. You can fetch such reports. Now you're capable to fetch such reports from the dashboard of your antivirus tool, whatever tool you're using. Say you're using Symantec, or if you're using McAfee and whatnot. So now you can, when it comes to managed basically means that you have a vision and you have a metric to measure how close you are to the vision. And generally these ISO frameworks come with a PDCA cycle, which is plan, do, check, act. Plan is you plan it out, like I'm going to implement antivirus in all the workstations which are going to be provisioned in the environment. Then you do it, you actually start installing it, you set the policy document. In plan, you set the policy document. In do, you set the procedure, you define the procedure document, you do this, you make the step-by-step document, and you tell all the stakeholders that this is what we are going to do. And in check, you compare the metric, you compare the compliance against the metric, as to these are the number of assets which are there in the environment, out of which these many are having antivirus installed, and there is this gap for which the act comes in. Act is where you continually improve. So every ISO standard tells you to continually improve. What continually improve means is continually, there's a distinction between continual improvement and continuous improvement. Continuous improvement basically deals with a linear improvement in the process. That is, you're constantly improving, and hence you're improving continuously. But when you're continually improving, then you are improving to a certain level. You have set a process, you have attained your target metrics. Now you check, okay, now I have attained, now 90% of my assets are having antivirus installed. But the problem is that out of 10% assets, 8% of the assets are in web zone, in dematerialized zone, or say separate network segment, where there is no antivirus policies, or say there's no firewall communication policies installed. So now you come up with a plan that, okay, I'll implement the new firewall policies and then install this antivirus in the rest of the 8% machines, and remaining 2% machines are which were not reachable in the network and whatnot, and you troubleshoot it. So you reach a certain level, then you plan again to improve the position, and then you improve your position again. So say you started with 0%, you reach 90%, you identified your obstacles, you planned again to defeat those obstacles or overcome those obstacles. Now you're at 96% or say 98%. So you, in case of continual improvement, you'll always reach this plateau where you plan again and then repeat the plan, do, check, act cycle. So you plan, you implement, then you check against metrics, and then you act, then you improve, and then start planning again. check, do, act. So you keep on repeating this PDCA cycle. Similarly, this CMM, in CMM, you keep on improving your capability. And once you have defined your capabilities, you reach the level 4, level 3 of capability, that is 0, 1, 2, 3. You have reached that third defined level. And you have also defined the maturity. Then you can simply count on the maturity of the operations, because your capabilities are already sorted. You already have the communication policies in place. Your servers, antivirus servers, are scaled properly, have the right kind of resources to cater to the need of the organization. And now you can simply improve upon the maturity of it. You can change the metrics to checking the definition level, checking how many threats are there in the environment. So your metric keep on changing when you continually improve. So with this, I wish to conclude this session. I hope it must have helped you understand a few things about the CISSP, and it must have given you a brief overview of domain 1 of the CISSP, which is very fundamental and forms the bedrock of the entire certificate examination.